In a world that rewards volume, your silence was mistaken for absence. They said you were too quiet, too withdrawn, too serious. But what if that silence wasn't emptiness, it was sight? Carl Jung saw you before anyone else did. He didn't call you broken, he called you intuitive, a visionary, someone who perceives what others cannot yet name. You always knew you were different, not louder, not faster, but deeper. You noticed things, you felt shifts in the room before anyone spoke. You understood people without needing their words, and you waited for someone to see what you saw. They never did. You tried to explain once what you felt, what you knew. Someone laughed, or worse, looked at you like you were speaking nonsense. So you smiled, you nodded, and slowly you stopped trying. This isn't just introversion, this is something rarer. This is the architecture of a mind tuned to patterns no one else sees. A perception that doesn't shout, but knows. Carl Jung called it introverted intuition, not daydreaming, not overthinking, but a quiet attunement to the invisible. A way of knowing that doesn't unfold step by step, but arrives whole, like a fully formed truth with no breadcrumbs leading to it. And when you offered that knowing to others, they asked you to explain it, to prove it, to make it fit into their boxes. But how do you explain a vision to someone who can't see the light? You weren't too slow, you were too far ahead, you weren't cold, you were processing more than anyone could understand. You weren't performing, you were perceiving. And because the world couldn't see what you saw, it assumed there was nothing there. It mistook your vision for vagueness, your depth for distance. That's the first exile, not of being different, but of being unseen in your difference. And so you learned to translate your vision into what others could tolerate. You simplified your truth, softened your tone, dimmed the parts of you that felt too big, too intense, too much. You became a mirror with no reflection, a violin that plays itself in the dark, a cathedral with locked doors, and the silence you now carry. It didn't begin as a choice. It began as a shield. But the silence didn't mean absence. It meant presence no one knew how to receive. So when they called you shy, what they didn't see was the storm behind your eyes. When they called you passive, what they missed was your inner certainty. And when they said you think too much, they had no idea what it meant to see without trying. They called you strange. But what if they just lacked the language? You weren't born to impress, you were born to witness. And you were never too quiet. You were just fluent in a language no one around you spoke. They didn't reject you, they just couldn't translate you. But it's time to stop translating. It's time to remember you were never lost. You were only ahead of your time. You live in a world designed for speed, clarity, and external validation. It measures intelligence by productivity, presence by participation, clarity by how quickly you respond, but your perception doesn't work that way. You are not slow, you are deep, you are not passive, you are patterned. Your awareness isn't scattered, it's dimensional. You don't move through information, you absorb it. Carl Jung called this mode of perception introverted intuition. It's not a guess, it's not mysticism. It's the art of symbolic synthesis, a way of seeing the invisible threads between things and drawing conclusions without conventional proof. But to the external world, driven by extroverted thinking and sensing, your inner compass looks suspicious because you just knew, because you didn't have a spreadsheet, because you paused before speaking. Because your truth didn't follow the steps others expected, so they dismissed it. They dismissed you. You were asked to prove what you already knew, to explain what hadn't yet unfolded, to justify what you felt but couldn't reduce to steps. You couldn't, because your clarity isn't linear. It arrives whole, like a painting already finished. But the world doesn't believe in paintings unless they watch you mix the paint. So what do? You build a mask, a persona. You learn to play the part, smiling at shallow conversations, pretending to agree when you disagree on a gut level, watering down your knowing until it's bland enough to be accepted. And what happens when your truth is diluted long enough? You begin to forget what it even was. There's an old story that echoes this ache. A young monk discovered a lamp that revealed hidden truths. When lit, it showed people's unspoken fears, their buried dreams, even the paths they were meant to follow. He shared it with others, but they were afraid. They mocked him, so he hid it away. Years passed. The lamp grew dim, not because it stopped working, but because it stopped being believed. You are that monk. That lamp is your intuition. How many times have you hidden your light because someone told you it didn't count? How many times have you held back because others couldn't handle what you saw? And yet the seeing never left you. The knowing never stopped. You still walk into rooms and feel their temperature change. You still meet people and read them before they speak, but you've learned to keep it quiet, to not mention the dream you had, the flash of insight, the gut feeling that turned out to be right again. Because each time you tried, the world handed you a warped mirror. It showed you a distorted version of yourself. It told you your insight was awkward, your intensity was off-putting, your foresight was arrogance, and you believed it. You internalized the distortion. You started thinking maybe your mind really is too much. Maybe you really are too hard to follow. But the mirror was lying. You were never hard to follow. You were just light years ahead, and while they were trying to fix your silence, you were quietly carrying a map they didn't know they needed. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs your depth, your insight, your perception. So stop apologizing for what they couldn't reflect. The truth is, they weren't meant to. Not everyone is a mirror. Some of us are lamps, and the world is darker without us. They called it weird, too abstract, too deep, too intense. But what if too much was always just a measure of what they couldn't hold? There's a kind of perception that doesn't ask for evidence because it doesn't need it. A way of knowing that doesn't arrive through steps but appears fully formed, like a painting that existed before the brush touched the canvas. That's your mind. Not a machine, not a container, but a channel, a compass, a mirror for things that haven't happened yet. Carl Jung called this introverted intuition, a gift that draws meaning from the depths of the unconscious, not theory, not logic, but the ability to sense what lives beneath the surface, to see connections that haven't been named, to feel futures trying to take shape. It's not guesswork, it's not fantasy, it's wisdom, arriving before the world is ready to receive it. But there's a cost. You pause before speaking, not because you're unsure, but because your truth is wide and the world is impatient. You hesitate, not from confusion, but because you see too much, too fast. They want clean answers. You offer layered insight. They want facts. You offer meaning, and when meaning feels too much like mystery, they call it nonsense. But here's the paradox no one tells you. The clearer your inner vision, the lonelier your outer world, because most people are looking for proof, but you live by pattern. They speak in linear time. You think in symbol, in story, in sensation. You feel the undercurrent before the wave has risen, and when you speak it, it sounds like prophecy to people who only trust the present. So you edit, soften, hold back. You don't say what you know, you say what they can hear, and in doing so, you become a stranger to your own sight. But you were never meant to be legible to everyone. You were meant to speak a soul language, and that language, it doesn't shout, it echoes, it hums in dreams. It moves through symbols. It shows up in the spaces between words, in the things you feel but don't always say. You are not broken, you are just fluent in mystery. As Clarissa Pinkola Estes wrote, "To be ourselves causes us to be exiled by many others. Yet to comply with what others want causes us to be exiled from ourselves." You've lived both exiles, and now you get to choose. You weren't made to explain the ocean to those standing on shore. You were made to swim in it, to describe its tides to those who already hear the call. So let them misunderstand. Let them label. Let them call you strange. Because you were never meant to live in their language. You were meant to remember your own. You are not a riddle. You are a revelation. Not weird, not broken, wise. And the world is starving for that kind of wisdom. There's a silence that heals. And there's a silence that wounds. The first is chosen, the second is inherited. You didn't choose this silence, it came slowly. After the third time, you shared a truth and were laughed at. After the seventh time, you felt something coming, but were told you were paranoid. After the 100th time, someone said, "You're too much." You didn't stop speaking because you had nothing left to say. You stopped because the world had no space to hear it. Carl Jung called it the persona, the mask we wear to survive the world's expectations, a face we put on to fit in, to be acceptable, manageable, polite. And so, over time, you traded your vision for validation. You began to mirror what others needed to see until you forgot how to reflect yourself. You stopped sharing your dreams, not because they stopped coming, but because they were too vivid, too strange, too accurate. You stopped following your knowing, not because it failed you, but because it kept leading you away from the herd. And eventually you learned the unspoken rule: be wise, but not too wise. Feel deeply, but not visibly. Sense things, but keep them to yourself. So you became likable and invisible, a mirror no one looked into, a violin locked in a case, a lamp hidden under a basket. There's a story about that lamp. A monk once discovered a flame so pure it revealed truth wherever it was brought. He took it into villages, believing people would rejoice. Instead, they flinched. They saw too much about others, about themselves, and so he learned to keep the lamp covered, not because it stopped working, but because it worked too well. That's you. You learned to cover what was sacred, because truth became a burden others asked you to carry alone. And in that hiding, the shadow formed. Not just the traits you rejected, but the gifts you buried. Your knowing, your foresight, your sacred inner flame. You didn't reject them because they were flawed. You rejected them because no one else could hold them. And over time, you learned to call those gifts problems. You labeled your depth as drama, your insight as overthinking, your intensity as a flaw. But a part of you still remembers. It shows up in your dreams, in that moment before sleep when you hear your truth whisper, in the patterns that repeat until you finally say, "I knew this all along." That's not anxiety, that's not overanalysis, that's you trying to come back. And the return is not loud, it won't ask for permission. It will come through symbols, through synchronicity, through the ache that won't leave. That ache is not emptiness, it's fullness, trapped in silence. You've worn the mask so long it fits like skin, but masks were made to protect, not to replace. And beneath it, the real face waits. Not soft, not loud, just honest. You don't need to perform your worth. You don't need to soften your sight. You don't need to shrink for comfort. Because the world may have feared your light, but it was never meant to be hidden. It was meant to be shared. You were never too much. You were simply untranslated. So come back, not louder, not clearer, just as you are. And let this be the first place where your silence is not mistaken for absence, but honored as presence. You were not made to disappear inside someone else's expectations, but somewhere along the line you did, not all at once. It started quietly, like everything else inside you. You noticed a look when you spoke too deeply, a pause in the room when your insight didn't match their rhythm, a moment when your knowing was dismissed and you smiled anyway. You thought you were adapting, but what you were really doing was editing yourself into someone smaller. Carl Jung called it individuation, not the process of becoming better, but of becoming whole, of peeling off every version of yourself you created for approval until only the true one remains. And here's what that path asks of you: that you stop calling survival your personality, that you stop mistaking self-abandonment for self-control, that you stop apologizing for the clarity that's been with you all along. You weren't born unsure, you were taught to question what came too naturally. Your intuition didn't break. It was buried under 1,000 polite nods, and every time you thought, they won't get it. So why say anything? But that part of you, the quiet seer, the deep listener, the one who felt the shift in the air before the door even opened, it didn't vanish. It waited. Sometimes it whispered through dreams. Other times through a line in a book or a memory that arrived like a sudden storm, the sense that something once lost had returned to the edge of your awareness, and you remembered that your gift was never your problem, only the world's discomfort with what it couldn't explain. You were never broken. You were edited. Now the real work begins. Not fixing yourself, but reclaiming what you were told to hide. That sharp perception, it wasn't judgment, it was insight. That emotional intensity, it wasn't chaos, it was honesty. That resistance to small talk and shallow praise, that wasn't awkwardness, it was depth refusing to dilute. You don't need to soften your edges to be worthy. You don't need to mask your knowing to be safe. Let the world misinterpret you. They've been doing it for years, but don't you dare misinterpret yourself. And if the journey back feels hard, that's because it's not just a path forward, it's a path inward. Through every version of you that kept quiet, performed peace and called it maturity. But there will be signs, moments that affirm you're not imagining it, like the dream that repeats with uncanny symbols, or the way a stranger says exactly what you've been holding in. Or the day you finally say what you know, and for the first time you don't care how it lands. You're not defensive, you're not explaining, you're just home. This is the sacred fire of individuation. It burns what's false so the truth can return. And when it does, you begin to sound like yourself again. You begin to breathe deeper in your own presence. You look in the mirror, and instead of adjusting your mask, you meet your gaze. Clear, whole, unedited. You don't need everyone to understand. You just need to stop hiding from the one who already does. Because you were never too much. You were not enough for the wrong places. And now you get to stop translating your soul into a language that was never meant for it. You were never broken. You were just waiting for someone, anyone, to stop asking you to be anything less than what you already are. Let that someone be you. There is someone watching this who doesn't know that their silence is sacred, who's been taught to mistrust their depth because it makes other people uncomfortable. Maybe that someone is you. And maybe all your life you've been carrying a flame you were never allowed to show, taught to hide your insights, to play dumb so others could feel smart, to soften your truth so it wouldn't make ripples. But here's what Carl Jung knew, and what you already feel. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs signal. It needs voices rooted in knowing, not reaction. It needs clarity that doesn't rise from performance, but from presence. You weren't given your depth to keep it hidden. You weren't born with vision so you could pretend to be blind. You were never meant to blend in. You were meant to reveal, to name what others only feel in fragments, to stand still while the rest rush past, to carry the light that others forgot to believe in. You are the lighthouse, not the ship, not the wave, the still point in the storm that helps others find their direction. And no, not everyone will look up, not everyone is meant to, but the ones who do, they'll never forget you. They won't remember your credentials, your followers, your polish. They'll remember how you made them feel less alone, how your truth gave them permission to stop performing, how your quiet knowing helped them trust their own. That is your role now, not to convince, but to mirror, not to shout, but to shine. And if you're wondering whether it matters, whether your voice will land, whether your insight will find a home, it already has, right here. In the space between these words, someone else is breathing deeper, someone else is remembering, and when they hear your voice, they'll whisper something you once needed to hear. I thought I was the only one. That's the moment your pain becomes light. That's the moment your difference becomes service. Because your intuition was never just for you. It was for those still wandering, still doubting, still editing themselves into extinction. So this is your invitation. Tell the truth that's been burning in you. Say the sentence you've rehearsed in silence. Write the post, speak the words, share the flame, even if it trembles, even if it's small, because it only takes one person at the right moment to feel seen, and everything changes. Comment the line you've carried for years but never spoken aloud. This is the space for it. not to be fixed, not to be judged, just to be heard. You were never too much. You were the map, you were the mirror, you were the light. Now let it shine.